Well, welcome to another episode of OTA on the Air. With us today is Secretary of State Frank LaRose. So, Mr. Secretary, thank you for taking some time out of your day to talk with us.
Absolutely, Tom. Thank you.
So, talk to to our listeners just a little bit about what your path was to becoming Secretary of State.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Summit County, born and raised there, and grew up in a family that is in a logistics and distribution business. And so know my way around a warehouse and something I'm familiar with and understand the work that your members do at a basic level. I enlisted in the Army when I was 18 years old. That was something that I always wanted to do. I was inspired by my Boy Scout leader, who's a World War II veteran. In fact, he's still with us in his late 90s at this point. An amazing guy, liberated a concentration camp when he was a young soldier. And so for me, the Army was a place I really fit in. I enjoyed it. I had sort of the military equivalent of a CDL. I drove flatbeds for the in the Army as an Army engineer, hauled around everything from like a D5 Caterpillar dozer, driving around places like Kosovo where the roads aren't quite the same quality that we have here. And you got to look out for landmines and all kinds of interesting things. And so again, I'm not a professional truck driver like your members are, but I understand a little bit about the business and the work that they do. After a few years doing that as an engineer, I got the chance to try out to become an Army Green Beret. I really enjoyed that. Had 6 years on a special forces team, traveled all around the world with my best friends and really a great experience. But I decided that it was time for me to get a formal education. I got a great education in the Army, but I decided it was time to get a college degree. So I went to Ohio State, earned a business degree. And on campus at that point, I'm in my late 20s. And so I ended up getting involved in political campaigns. It sort of became my social circle, the people that I got to know. Worked on local races here in Central Ohio as a student at Ohio State, and even got to work on a presidential campaign. Really had a wonderful experience with it. And decided I should run for office. So I went home to Akron, Ohio, where I was born and raised. I ran for the state Senate in what a lot of people thought was an unlikely race. I was a Republican running in Summit County, which is not exactly friendly terrain for Republicans, but we worked really hard, and I organized it kind of like a unconventional operation, like we would say in the military. We knocked on a lot of doors and did the work and pulled out a win in 2010. Was sworn into the state Senate in 2011. Spent 8 years doing that, including time as the transportation chairman, which was probably one of my favorite assignments. I served on the transportation committee my whole 8 years, but I loved serving as the transportation chairman. And that's time when we really got the chance to work very closely together in the great advocacy work that you and OTA does and all of your members. But after 8 years serving in the state Senate, I decided to run for Secretary of State. I'd also built up an expertise as the person that worked on elections bills in the state legislature, a few key bills like creating online voter registration in Ohio, funding for the new secure state-of-the-art voting equipment that Ohio counties were purchasing, and many other bills that helped us remove deceased people from the voter rolls, for example, and helped us to maintain accurate rolls. So all of those are things that I did. And then when John Husted was term limited and decided to run for lieutenant governor, I decided to run for Secretary of State. Hard fought campaign, as they all are here in Ohio, and was able to earn a win in 2018. And I've enjoyed doing this job ever since, specifically because of the two missions of this office. And that's sort of my mindset, comes from my time in the Army. I guess you've got to focus on the mission. If you believe in the mission, if you love the mission, then it doesn't feel like work, right? It feels like something that you really just enjoy doing. And that's the way I view it. That's the way my team is as well. We've built a team that shares that sense of mission. And our mission, very clearly here at the Secretary of State's office, is two very simple things. In government, we like to overcomplicate things. I try to cut through all the BS and just keep it simple. We help people vote, and we help people start businesses. We help people vote, and we help people start businesses. And so those are the two things that we do at the Secretary of State's office. I love every day of it, and look forward to talking more about it throughout today's conversation.
Well, great. So you talked a little bit about your time in the legislature, and you were instrumental in a number of pieces of legislation. But I guess what were some of your favorite pieces, and what impact did they have on the state of Ohio?
Yeah, so it's kind of like asking me to pick my favorite child, right? It's funny because in the 8 years I spent in the legislature, I got to work on a lot of things that I was really passionate about. And so I'll have to probably name a couple. We worked on several bills actually that work to reduce regulations. We all know that there need to be rules, right? But they need to be predictable, reasonable, understandable, and not change all the time. government has a bad habit of creating rules on top of rules on top of rules and never getting rid of the old ones. And so I worked as JCAR chair. JCAR is probably not something that every one of your members is familiar with, but it's a somewhat obscure committee, but it's really important. It's a committee in the state legislature that reviews the rules that administrative organizations make. So, somewhere in the state office tower, somebody's coming up with rules that your members are going to have to live by. They shouldn't just go on in perpetuity. They got to get reviewed every 5 years, make sure that they are actually consistent with the objective. Is the juice worth the squeeze, that kind of thing. And so I work to really strengthen JCAR, the Joint Committee on Agency Rule Review, so that we have that check on the administrative power to just make new rules that you're really have the force of law, and that members like yours and folks all over the state have to comply with. And so strengthening that so we could really get government out of the way and let the private sector thrive was one that I cared about quite a bit. Another one that I worked on from the very beginning of my time in the state legislature was trying to improve the way district lines are drawn. You've probably heard of people call it gerrymandering sometimes. The work of redistricting has to be done every 10 years after the census. The census happens in the year ending in 0. New lines have to be drawn in the year ending in 1. The problem is the old process that had been in place for many decades was kind of a winner take all proposition, where whichever party happened to be in charge got to draw lines that really suited them. And it had been both the Republicans and the Democrats over the years that had taken full advantage of that for their own political reasons. But it wasn't satisfactory to the voters of Ohio. We kind of, again, basic like 7th grade civics class here is that the voters get to pick their politicians. It shouldn't be politicians picking their voters. And so we worked to finally get that process reformed in Ohio through 2 separate constitutional amendments. One created the way that we draw state legislative districts for the state house and state senate, and another one created a new and more balanced process for the way that we draw congressional districts. Both of those went to the voters because as a constitutional amendment, the voters have to approve it. And one got, I think, 72 or 73% support. Another one got 75% support, which is incredible. I mean, Tom, these days it's hard to get 75% of people to agree what day of the week it is in politics. So the fact that we got that kind of support showed that Ohioans really wanted a new process. And now, as a member of the redistricting commission, one of the 7 members on that commission, I'll get to help carry that process out faithfully and consistent with the spirit of that reform. So that's another thing. And then I have to mention just the budgets that we worked on. Probably the most impactful thing the state legislature does every 2 years is the budget, both the state operating budget and, again, for me, the state transportation budget, where we get to invest billions of dollars in transportation infrastructure. I always call that the good government spending, because there's also bad government spending. There's plenty of things that government spends money on that they probably shouldn't, or that doesn't really yield the results that you would want. But infrastructure is a smart investment. Infrastructure is when you're building the things that our society needs to thrive and prosper. And so I was always very focused on infrastructure and keeping it focused on the things that really mattered. Tom, you probably heard my rant about noise walls and what a waste of money I think those are. And in the context of transportation budgets, we should spend money on transportation issues. Again, the transportation budget is money that's derived from the motor fuel tax. It should be spent on infrastructure to support those who drive. And that's the bottom line. I'm a big fan of trails and other kinds of things, but that's not what you should be spending transportation money on, for example, as well. And so really trying to keep our transportation budget focused on the stuff that matters. I really enjoyed working on several transportation budgets and operating budgets. And in Ohio, over the last 8 years, when I was in the state legislature, we were able to cut taxes and streamline government and do the things that are necessary to keep government running. You've got to have the functions of government have to work, but at the same time, we shouldn't be collecting a penny more than is necessary to make government function, and we shouldn't have useless regulations that are in the way. What this was all about is getting government to live within its means and to stay out of the way so that the private sector can thrive. And now, as the person that helps people start new businesses at the Secretary of State's office, I'm getting to see that come to fruition as Ohioans at record numbers are starting new businesses with our office. And that's something that we're really proud of.
Yeah, and you would definitely get almost 100% support from our members on especially infrastructure spending and government regulation to make sure that people are allowed to do, to carry out their businesses and do the work that they need to get done to keep the economy moving forward without burdensome regulations that don't have any real impact on how they operate their business. Obviously, we want to run as safe as possible, but some of the stuff overreaches greatly. So thank you for that work. While you were in the legislature, you did sponsor a bill that directed the Department of Public Safety to look at ways to open up access to convert a military CDL, which you mentioned you had, to a civilian CDL. Why was that important to you?
Well, of course, as first of all, as your members know all too well, workforce is one of the most profound challenges that your industry faces, and making sure that we've got good, safe, qualified, drug-free men and women to operate heavy trucks on the highway here in the state of Ohio is so important. And some of the best qualified that really have the right character traits and the right responsibility to do that work are my fellow veterans. Those who served in uniform are some of America's finest. These are men and women that are patriotic, that are hardworking, that are, again, responsible as far as staying drug and substance free and being smart about operating a motor vehicle. They proved that in the military. In many cases, they drove in very difficult environments. As I was telling you, I drove a tractor trailer in Kosovo where it felt like the roads were about 6 feet wide, and I think my trailer was a little bit wider than that by the time you had the dozer blade hanging over either side. Those are the kind of things that the kind of experiences that you have in the military that really does prepare you for the work of being a safe CDL driver here in Ohio. Now, of course, there's some things that you need to do to get ready to drive in the civilian world that are different. Some of the hazmat regulations, the DOT requirements, keeping a logbook, all that stuff. And so what I always said is that, you've got men and women coming out of the military that have the Defense Department equivalent of a CDL. They've proven that they're safe when it comes to driving and operating the actual maneuverability backing of that motor vehicle. They know how to secure a load. They know how to do all of those things. And all we need to do is then get them trained up on the CDL specific stuff, the DOT requirements and logbook and that kind of stuff. And then they'll be ready to go. And again, not only is it good for industry, but it's good for my fellow veterans. And that's perhaps the most important thing, is that these are men and women who have served our country in uniform, who deserve to be able to earn a living now in the civilian world and provide for their families. And so, it's something that's good for industry. It's good for Ohio, and it's good for my fellow veterans. And that's why we worked really hard to streamline that. And Tom, as you know, it's still a work in progress.
Yeah, we're still working through that. It's very interesting when you get into the federal government. I wish they would take the same approach that you and your colleagues take or took when you were in the legislature and take now about making sure that regulations are meant to keep people safe and keep people on an even playing field, but not be overly burdensome that they lack common sense. So we'll get there eventually.
When you're a bureaucrat in the bowels of the federal agency somewhere, the safest answer is always no. You can never get in trouble for saying no. You can often get in trouble for saying yes. But that's why it takes elected officials that are willing to kind of rattle their cage and force them to do the right thing and be a change agent, right? Because again, government resists change. It's kind of built that way. But it takes people at the top who serve in public office that are willing to make change, even when it's uncomfortable for the people in the agencies.
So let's shift the conversation to elections. As the chief elections officer for Ohio, talk to us a little bit about the impact that COVID had on the 2020 election process and how you feel your office and the boards of election did in adapting to that change.
Yeah. So I told you at the onset that I have two missions: helping people vote and helping people start businesses. That's what we do here. And last year, 2020, was record breaking for both, right? We broke records for voting and for new business starts in the state of Ohio. So let's focus on the voting side of things. 2020 was not only our most successful year for running elections in Ohio, but it was also the most difficult year we've ever faced. And so here's how you can just sort of break that down. I mean, everything about running an election was made more complicated because of the global pandemic that we faced, from poll worker recruitment to even just organizing the logistics of a polling location, to the demand on the early voting and absentee voting systems, which normally in Ohio would run at 20 to 25% of the ballots, and then we saw it more than double last year, which we knew was going to happen once this pandemic began. But then layer on top of this things that were happening long before the pandemic, this really difficult and partisan political environment, really corrosive sort of national politics that was happening where people were, it was like family versus family kind of stuff, and people were getting too personal and too emotional really about politics, to the really difficult and pernicious threat of foreign disinformation that we were facing, to the civil unrest in our cities due to racial justice issues and other really important things that our society, still has to grapple with in many ways. So really, you put all that together, 2020 was bar none the most difficult election season that we've ever faced as a state and as a nation. A friend of mine, the former Kentucky Secretary of State, wrote a column in The Economist magazine where he said that if you were to put a bunch of experts together and come up with the simulation for the worst case scenario to sort of test American democracy, it would look like 2020. But you know what? The good news is, at least here in Ohio, we came through it shining. When the world was watching, Ohio was ready. And I'll explain that here in a couple ways. First of all, we had a good foundation. Ohio, for more than 20 years, has been in the national spotlight. We've grown accustomed to that. Sometimes we take that for granted, but in many other states, they're not used to that level of scrutiny. It should come as no surprise that the two states that may have done the best last year were Ohio and Florida, because we were both ready for it. We've had years to work on getting good legislation done in the state house to make it easier to vote in Ohio, but also harder to cheat, right? We've had years of, unfortunately, and it's never fun, but litigation through the courts that have helped refine the process in some ways as well. We've really professionalized our elections administration such that the men and women that work at our 88 county boards of elections, by and large, are very dedicated professionals. This is not just somebody's, part-time job or whatever else. These are people that are dedicated to the work, who have requirements to meet continuing education credits. And on the rare occasions where we have a board of elections that's not meeting those standards, I hold them accountable. And if you've been reading in the news recently about me doing that, that's exactly what we're doing. There's a handful of boards that have been subpar. They haven't been meeting our expectations. And so we've been working to bring some change there. And that means new people, that means cultural change, that means new procedures and everything else. So Ohio had a good foundation to begin with as it relates to elections. And then our team really worked to take that to the next level. We organized a weekly meeting once this pandemic began called the Ready for November Task Force, where we met virtually. We brought in national experts. We were, of course, we always try to avoid lines, but we were trying to figure out how to manage lines. So we brought in the experts. We brought in Cedar Point and Kings Island amusement park operators and who's better at managing lines than an amusement park? And they gave us some great advice. We brought in health officials from the CDC, from the Ohio Department of Health. We worked with private industry to make sure that we had all of the right PPE that we needed, literally tons of PPE, much of it donated by great patriotic Ohio companies that stepped up to do that. We had a 34-point health checklist that really kind of became the national guideline. 61 point. Started off as 34 point. We grew at a 61-point checklist. I'm a big believer in checklists. You take a complex set of tasks and just organize it as a checklist, and that way you don't forget something. So we told the boards of elections, here's the checklist to follow. If you do every one of these things, then we'll have a safe and secure environment for voting in November. And so we did that, and that sort of became a national model that other states wanted to follow. The bottom line is this, Tom. We had a saying in the Army that you sweat in training so you don't bleed in battle. You sweat in training so you don't bleed in battle. It's a simple statement about preparation. We did the preparation. We did our sweating throughout the summer of 2020 so that Ohio was ready to go. And when election day happened, Ohio ran the most successful election we've ever had. And again, I don't hesitate for a second to say the most successful election in our state's history. Here are the numbers. 6 million people cast a ballot, blows away anything we've ever seen. 74% of registered voters participating, again, record breaking. Even the number of poll workers that we had, we were worried that we wouldn't have enough poll workers. So we launched 5 recruiting programs, ended up with 56,000 Ohioans ready to work the polls, ready to open every one of our close to 4,000 polling locations on election day morning, again, blows away anything we've ever seen. Even things like 94% of people that requested an absentee ballot actually returned it. Again, record-breaking number. Even the accuracy rate was record-setting on two fronts. One, on the rejection rate going down. When voters vote absentee, they can make a mistake and have their ballot rejected. That number normally hovers around 1%. We were very proactive about training voters with new information and proactive public communication, working with boards of elections to correct those errors. And so we were able to drive that error rate down from 1% down to 0.42. And then when we ran our post-election audit, which we required every board of elections to run a post-election audit throughout the end of November and into the month of December, it returned an accuracy rate of 99.98%. And so when the world was watching, Ohio was ready. Ohio is now what many consider the national model. Other states that know that they need to make changes to their election laws, other states that stumbled on election day last year are now looking to Ohio as the example to follow. Just 2 weeks ago, I was testifying in the Pennsylvania state legislature because over there in the Keystone State, they realized that their neighbors over here to the west have it together, and they want to know how to make their elections more like Ohio. And I would suggest that other states look at doing the same.
Yes, let's talk a little bit about that. Obviously, election law is front and center in the national discussion, especially with the state of Georgia. But I guess give us a state of the elections process in Ohio, how you feel the office is protecting people's right to vote while making sure it's a very secure and fair process.
Yeah, so that's it, Tom. It's a balance, right? And what we want to do is make sure that it's convenient to vote, and simple and easy and trouble-free for people, but also that it's a secure and trustworthy process that people know and intuitively believe is an honest process. And it's a false choice to say you have to choose between one or the other. Unfortunately, some present it as that. They say if you're making your elections more secure, you must be making it harder for people to vote. Well, not in Ohio, and we haven't had to make that sacrifice. So we've got this good balance. I'll give you an example. In Ohio, we make absentee voting available to every Ohioan that wants it. This is how Lauren and I have voted in the past. It's a convenient way to do it. You can vote from your kitchen table. When you mail in your ballot, you can track it at voteohio.gov to make sure that it's received by the Board of Elections. So you get that same satisfaction you would get of actually putting it in the ballot box yourself by knowing that it's been received at the Board of Elections and will be counted. But at the same time, we don't just mail an absentee ballot to everybody. We make you request it, right? And so we add that step of you got to prove your identity. You've got to supply us with the last four of your social security number or your state driver's license number. We match the signatures. We verify that your signature actually matches the one on file. Of course, that's a bipartisan process to make sure that those signatures match. And so in Ohio, we have absentee voting, which makes it really convenient, but it's also a secure process. I'll give you another example, Tom. One of the most important things that we can do to protect the integrity of our process is to maintain accurate voter rolls. It blows my mind, but in some states, they just have stopped doing this because it's become a political hot topic. You know, some folks have called it purging the voter rolls. That's really not the right word to use because it's got such a negative connotation. I mean, yes, we're removing deceased people from the voter rolls. Yes, we're removing people from the voter rolls that have moved out of state. That's what we should do. That's what the law requires us to do. And by the way, it's what Republican and Democratic secretaries of state had done in the past. But in some states, again, they've just stopped maintaining the accuracy of their voter rolls because of the political sensitivity to it. Not here in Ohio. We do this on a monthly basis. We send a list every month to every county board of elections and say, these are the deceased that need to be removed from the voter rolls. And honestly, I caught a board of elections in Northeast Ohio that wasn't doing that, and we're holding them accountable. And I've replaced people and told them that you can't just, keep doing this work if you're not going to do it accurately. And is that tough? Yeah, but that's accountability and that's leadership. We maintain the accuracy of our voter rolls. And so that's not something that, that's anything to be ashamed of. That's something that we're proud of because, again, that's the most important thing that we can do to protect the process. But again, at the same time, in Ohio, we've got among the most permissive set of early voting days of any state in the country. With a month of early voting, there's no good excuse. Right. You've got 4 weeks of early voting, including evening hours and weekend hours. You can vote from the comfort of home. If you want to wait until election day, there are something like 4,000 polling locations open in Ohio. So there's one pretty close to your house where you're assigned to go vote. You can register to vote online. And so in Ohio, if you're not voting, it's because you've made a choice not to vote. There's genuinely no good excuse at this point, and that's good. We want it to be convenient, but also secure. Ohio has that balance, and then again, this is why we're viewed as a real national example.
So you mentioned earlier, one of your other responsibilities is registering new businesses in Ohio. I guess talk to us a little bit about how that process has changed under your leadership and what you're seeing as far as new business growth in Ohio.
Yeah. So as I told you, we had record-breaking year on elections, also on businesses, and this seems a little counterintuitive, right? When we all last March of 2020 started to learn about what is a pandemic and what is this virus and what's it like to live in a once a century global pandemic, all of these things that have changed all of our lives. We thought that at the beginning of that new business formation was just going to fall off. Who would be so courageous, right, to go out in the middle of a once a century global pandemic and start a new business? Well, I mean, that's a courageous, some would even say foolhardy thing to do, right? And so we saw a little drop in the month of March, and it actually timed out well because that's right as we were sending everybody home and literally like shipping scanners home to people's houses so that they could work from their kitchen table. But something remarkable happened toward the end of March and into April. Those numbers just started climbing. May, they climbed, June, all through the summer. And by October, we had shattered the previous record for new business formation in the state of Ohio. And it just kept on going through the fall and into the winter. And then in December, when we had our busiest week of the year, which intuitively it makes sense, it's that week between Christmas and New Year's when a lot of people are trying to get their end of year filings done. And so our team here is really cranking during that week, and it was all hands on deck to make sure that we got the work done. But by the time we popped a cork on New Year's Eve, 171,000 new businesses had been created in the state of Ohio. Again, far and away the record-breaking year. Now, it's important to caution people on this. A new business formation is not a perfect economic indicator, right? I mean, the fact that 171,000 new businesses were created in Ohio, it's not necessarily a perfect indicator of the trajectory of our economy, because we know that 75% of new businesses fail within the first 5 years. We know that many of those may have been somebody reorganizing an existing business into several component parts for tax purposes or whatever else. All of that's fine. But what it tells me when we're shattering the previous year's record, and by the way, again, in 2021, it seems like we're on track to do that again, based on the numbers that we're seeing right now. But it tells me that there's a fundamental optimism among Ohio's entrepreneurs about the future of our state. It tells me that the people that are so courageous that they would go out and start a business believe that participation in Ohio's free market economy is the way to prosperity going forward. And again, I think that your members are also in many ways kind of an indicator of the direction of the economy. Whenever I talk to an OTA member, I ask them, how are things looking? How are people moving stuff, right? Because fundamentally, if people are moving stuff, that means that the economy is moving around. That's why really one of the best barometers for the economic future of our state is how busy those OTA members are as far as the logistics of moving things around Ohio and around really the world.
So let's go back to the what we talked about earlier about you picking between your favorite child. But I guess would you list as one of your biggest successes as Secretary of State?
Well, I'll pick one on the election side and I'll pick one on the business side. You asked in your previous question, how are things different in our business services division? First is just an obsessive customer focus. We've got people that have really embraced that, and so somebody calls us at 5 p.m. We don't do that, hey, I'm sorry, we're closed and can't take care of you. We make sure that the problem is solved. I remember about a year ago, there was a guy that drove here from Youngstown because he had an urgent business matter to take care of. And I was pulling out of the parking garage at like 6 p.m. and I saw him pulling on the door, just hoping that somebody would still be here. And I pulled over and I unlocked the door and I brought him in and we called our staff and we got his situation resolved remotely. That's just the kind of thing that we want to do because we want to see Ohio businesses thrive, and we don't want anything in our wheelhouse to stand in the way of that. We've also, in our business services division, had a real focus on just encouraging entrepreneurship, especially among Ohio's minority entrepreneurs. There's this great entrepreneurial spirit among new American immigrants and minorities. Sometimes it's born from just the necessity of there was a point in time where others wouldn't hire them, and so they said, hey, I'm going to start my own business. So what a beautiful response to a bad situation that's the human spirit alive and well. And so we want to really encourage entrepreneurship, and so we're working to try to remove barriers. In fact, there's a piece of legislation we're working on right now that specifically removes barriers for minority entrepreneurs, but we're also trying to connect them with services that exist. So we changed one of the things that we do in that we now ask you a survey question when you start your new business. It's optional. If you don't want to provide this information, you don't have to, but we ask you, are you a minority owned business, a female owned business, a disabled Ohioan who owns this business, or a veteran? If you're in one of those categories, then there's a whole list of things that we can do to connect you with existing resources. We don't need to reinvent the wheel and create some new thing, but there's a whole menu of stuff out there from the local level to the county, state, federal, SBA, and all these different things that exist out there. So let's just connect you with them. Let's be that matchmaker to connect a new business owner. The day that we give you your articles of incorporation, let's also give you a menu of here are all the things that you can do to put a little bit of fuel in the tank as you launch your business. So on the business side, that's something I'm really proud of. On the election side, it's just got to be running a smooth and honest and accessible election for the people of Ohio in 2020. I don't want to take the credit for that, although we worked extremely hard. It's the work of 88 county boards of elections, bipartisan teams. And I'll think about this again, in a time where it feels like the folks in Washington can't agree what day of the week it is. At your county board of elections, you've got a building which is half Republicans and half Democrats, and they work very well together and do this really high stakes, high profile, very logistically challenging work of running elections. And they do it in a very patriotic way as Ohioans, even though half of them are Republicans and half of them are Democrats. And so it's those 88 boards of elections that made the 2020 election such a shining example here in the state of Ohio. And that's got to be probably my proudest accomplishment thus far, but we're not going to rest on that. We've got several pieces of legislation that we're working on right now at the State House to really try to continue modernizing Ohio's elections so that we're ready for the next big election.
Well, Secretary LaRose, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to talk with us, and for all the work that you and your staff have done to make sure that Ohio's election process and business processes are as smooth and accurate as possible.
Hey, thanks, Tom. A couple pitches real quick. If you're interested in starting a business, ohiosos.gov is the place to do it. We're there 24/7 to serve you at ohiosos.gov. We have a hotline that's 877-SOS-OHIO that's manned by a really dedicated team here in Ohio that'll answer all your questions for either business or elections, 877-SOS-OHIO. And then two other things, voter registration. It always matters. And I know most of your members are thinking, I've been registered for years, but think about that 18-year-old in your life, maybe one of your own children or grandchildren. Remind them that now's the time to go to voteohio.gov and get registered to vote. It only takes a few minutes, and consider signing up to be a poll worker. We had a great response from Ohio businesses last year. We had businesses that were giving their people a day off. We called that Give a Day for Democracy to be a poll worker, which was really a cool thing to see. And if you want a real crash course in how elections really work, signing up to be a poll worker gives you that. You'll see all this stuff on the internet. A lot of it's pretty dubious about election conspiracy theories and everything else. If you sign up to be a poll worker, you'll know really how elections work, and you'll understand what a secure and honest process it is here in Ohio. So again, the place to sign up to be a poll worker is voteohio.gov. When you do that, your county board of elections will call you. They'll schedule you for training and assign you to a polling location so that you can help your neighbors vote. It's a really cool thing to be a part of.
Great. Well, thank you again, Secretary LaRose, and keep up the great work.
Thanks, Tom. Keep on trucking.
See ya.
See ya.
Great. Thanks, man.
Yeah, absolutely. See you soon.
Yeah, have a good weekend.
Bye.